I walked into that courthouse with cameras exploding like gunfire, already branded a failure before I ever opened my mouth. My mother was dressed for a funeral that wasn't hers. My brother wore that easy smirk he saves for people he's about to ruin. And my father sat there like a saint, ready to watch me get stripped in public. I expected humiliation. I expected headlines. I expected to be made into a cautionary tale. Then the judge looked up, leaned forward, and asked one question so precise it felt like a blade. My father froze. My brother's smirk died mid-breath, and their lawyer went paper white right there at the table. Because that question didn't just expose their lie, it dragged into the light the one thing I'd kept buried for 8 years. The reason they were willing to burn me down in front of the whole city. My name is Dash Mercer. And before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, I just need to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone is listening is the only thing that keeps you steady when your own family is trying to erase you. If you've ever been the one scapegoated, underestimated, or punished for building a life they couldn't control, go ahead and subscribe, because this channel is where we tell the truth all the way through and we don't let anyone rewrite it into a lie. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And now, let me tell you everything. It was still dark when the car dropped me at the curb outside the federal courthouse in Manhattan, the kind of winter morning where the sky looks like damp concrete and the wind finds every gap in your coat. The moment my shoes hit the sidewalk, the flashes hit too hard, white bursts like someone firing a camera instead of a gun. I didn't come here because I was broke. I came here because my family wanted the entire city to believe I was. I came here because they decided the cleanest way to bury me wasn't with silence or distance, but with paperwork and headlines. Dash Mercer, a reporter, shouted, microphone already inches from my mouth. Is it true you squandered $2.4 million of your brother's money? Another voice cut over the first. Is your company a shell? Did you mislead investors? The questions didn't sound like curiosity. They sounded like captions. Like the story had been written before I ever stepped out of the car, and all they needed was my face to finish it. I kept my eyes forward. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't flinch, didn't glare, didn't give them the clip they were hunting, the angry young CEO, the unstable son, the guy who can't handle pressure. In this country, the moment you look emotional, people stop listening to your facts and start narrating your downfall. Elena Marquez was already there, half a step ahead of me, moving like she owned every square inch of marble we walked on. She didn't look at the cameras either. She just carried 3 heavy banker boxes like they weighed nothing, the cardboard edges biting into her arms. It was a small detail, but it steadied me. My family brought theater. Elena brought evidence. Inside the courthouse lobby should have felt sterile metal detectors, muted footsteps, people trying not to make eye contact. Instead, it felt like a cocktail hour transplanted into federal property. The marble walls echoed with soft laughter and polite greetings, the kind you hear at fundraisers in Westchester, where everyone pretends they don't keep score. And there, like he was posing for an oil portrait, my father stood near the security checkpoint, shaking hands with a man I recognized from the business pages, Reed Halston. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect tie knot. He wasn't reading a legal brief. He wasn't anxious about his son being dragged through court. He was networking. He was turning my ruin into a room he could work. I watched him clap someone on the shoulder like they were old friends, and I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. This wasn't justice to him. This was an event. My mother sat a few yards away on a wooden bench, dressed head to toe in severe black like she'd come to mourn. A silk handkerchief rested in her hands, and she dabbed at her eyes with a timing that was almost musical, tear pause, sigh, glance upward. Around her were 2 women from the charity circuit, leaning in as if they were listening to a tragedy instead of watching one being manufactured. My sister Blair hovered nearby with her phone angled just right, not too obvious, not too casual, always aware of where the light hit, where the cameras could frame her. She didn't have to say a word. She curated the picture-devoted family, heartbroken mother, wayward son. Then Colton appeared in my peripheral vision like a shadow with a perfect haircut. My brother moved the way people move when they've never once had to second-guess whether they belong. He picked his spot carefully, an easy angle where the glass doors behind him would catch the outside cameras if they were still trying to shoot through. He saw me, and his mouth tipped into that half-smile, the one that never reached his eyes. Not warmth, not pity, certainty. "Dash," he said, loud enough for nearby ears to catch, but soft enough to sound like concern. "This doesn't have to be ugly." I kept walking. Elena's hand touched my elbow, subtle but firm. "Don't." That was the message. Don't give him anything for free. Colton matched our pace for a few steps, like we were siblings heading to brunch instead of enemies heading to court. "You're tired," he continued. "I get it. You've been playing hard mode for a long time. Just be practical. Transfer operational control temporarily, or the IP. Let us stabilize things. You walk out with dignity. No more cameras, no more headlines. You can even keep a title. Everyone saves face." My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. He was offering me a bargain the way a thief offers you your own wallet back after he's already emptied it. He wanted my company's keys. He wanted my system. He wanted to make my work his property and then call it mercy. "I'm not negotiating in a hallway," I said, and even that felt like too much. His smile sharpened. Then by noon he murmured, "You'll be nothing." Elena stepped between us without breaking stride, her voice low and controlled. Mr. Halston stepped back. "Any communication goes through counsel." Colton lifted his hands like he'd been caught trying to help. He let us go because he didn't need to chase. He believed the room belonged to him. He believed the story belonged to him. And the worst part. On a surface level, it already did. Cameras at the doors, reporters in the lobby, my mother in mourning black, my father shaking hands like a saint, Blair positioned like a public relations manager, everyone watching me like I'd already been convicted. We reached the corridor outside courtroom 7. I could hear the muffled shuffle of people settling inside, the scrape of chairs, the quiet urgency of press. Elena set the boxes down for a moment and looked at me without softness. "Remember," she said, "they want you reactive. They want you messy. Let them perform. Today is about process and proof." I nodded, but my throat felt tight. Not from fear of the judge, from something older. From the feeling of being the family scapegoat, the one they could point to whenever they needed a villain to make themselves look cleaner. When the doors opened, the gallery was already filling. I saw the press notebooks. I saw the phones. I saw my father's profile from the front row, straight-backed, composed, ready to be wounded on camera. My mother's handkerchief moved on cue. Colton's smirk returned as soon as he took his seat. Blair angled herself again, ensuring she'd be visible to anyone who'd later screenshot the room and call it news. I sat at the defendant's table and folded my hands on the smooth wood. The sound of paper rustling felt louder than it should. Pen tips scratched across notepads like insects. Elena slid one box closer, then another, calm as a surgeon. I looked across the aisle at my brother and understood with a sick clarity they weren't just trying to embarrass me. They were trying to erase me from my own industry. Bankruptcy wasn't the end goal. It was the weapon. If they could stamp me insolvent in a federal courtroom, contracts would freeze, clients would panic, and the world I built would collapse under a label they manufactured. I kept my face still, but my mind snapped backward 8 years like a door opening onto a room I hadn't entered in a long time. Because this didn't begin with a petition. It began with a verdict delivered long before any judge ever knew my name. It began in my father's library in Scarsdale, on an afternoon when I showed them the thing I believed in, and they sentenced me for it at home. 8 years ago, the Scarsdale house smelled like polished wood and lemon wax, the kind of scent that clings to money that's been in one family too long. It was late fall, gray light filtering through tall windows, and I stood in the library with a pitch deck I'd rehearsed until my throat went raw. I wasn't naive about them. I knew my family didn't do passion. They did optics. They did safety. They did legacy. But I believed stupidly earnestly that if I spoke their language, if I came with numbers and projections and a clean structure, they'd hear me as more than the odd one out. I set my laptop on the heavy desk and laid printed slides on the coffee table like evidence in a case. Operational technology, ICS security, substations, water treatment, hospital systems. I walked them through the reality, the old industrial protocols still running half the country duct taped to the modern internet, vulnerable in ways most people never imagine until the lights go out. I showed them threat reports, market forecasts, case studies. I talked about ransomware and state-sponsored attacks, about how the line between cyber and physical had already blurred, and how the next crisis wouldn't be stolen credit cards, it would be poisoned water, or a dead hospital generator. I talked for 20 minutes straight, heart-pounding, hands steady because I'd trained them to be. When I finished, there was a silence so thick, it felt like the room had absorbed every sound. My father didn't look at my graphs. He looked at me. Reed Halston leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, expression smooth and clinical. This, he said, is a hobby. The word hit like a slap. It's not a hobby, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It's critical. The demand. He lifted a hand, dismissing my sentence mid-flight. We manage capital, he said. We don't crawl around in server rooms. Colton laughed from the couch, not loud, just enough to signal allegiance. He picked up one of my printed pages, glanced at the headline, and tossed it back down. So you're basically a mechanic, he said, smiling. With a keyboard. My mother's eyes softened in that particular way wealthy people soften their eyes when they're deciding to pity you instead of respect you. Blair didn't speak. She didn't need to. She sat there like she was watching something unfortunate happen to someone else, already calculating how to explain it later if anyone asked. I tried one last time. I'm asking for seed capital, I said. Not a gift, an investment. I'll pay it back with interest. Treat it like a transaction. My father sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a man burdened by a child who refuses to be convenient. Dash, he said, you're smart, but you're not built for this. You get attached. You obsess. You'll burn through money trying to save the world, and then you'll come back here broke. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the perfectly trimmed lawn like it was proof he was right. I won't fund your failure, he said without turning around. When you're ready to be serious, Colton can find you a place, compliance, operations, something appropriate. That was the trial. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a sentence spoken like law: you don't belong. Guilty of wanting something they didn't understand. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I gathered my papers, slid them back into my folder, and walked out of that library with my hands steady and my chest hollow. I didn't quit my family in a dramatic scene. I simply stepped out of their orbit and started moving like a man who had no intention of crawling back. Brooklyn was the opposite of Scarsdale in every way that mattered. My first place was small, loud, and honest, thin walls, rattling heat sirens in the distance. I took a job as an analyst because bills don't care about pride. At night, I learned OT protocols until my eyes burned. I spent hours in freezing data centers where nobody asked who my father was. The first time I got a 3 a.m. call because a system went down and a client was losing money by the minute, I felt the truth land in my body in the real world. Your last name isn't a credential. Competence is. I learned to stay calm when everything was loud. I learned to follow procedure when panic wanted the wheel. I learned that you can be exhausted and still be precise. That discipline became the backbone of everything I built later, even when my family tried to make me look like a reckless kid playing businessman. And then came Evan Pike. Evan wasn't my family's kind of person. He didn't have pedigree or polish. He had raw talent and charm, the kind that makes you believe he's on your side because he speaks your language. We met through a security meetup, started working on a prototype together, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself think maybe partnership could be safe. I showed him code. I showed him contacts. I showed him the shape of the thing I was building in my head. One morning, I logged into our shared server and found it empty. Not moved, not reorganized. Gone. Evan vanished too, no texts, no calls, just a silence that told me everything. Weeks later, I heard through the grapevine he'd sold a version of our prototype to a competitor for a quick payout and called it business. I sat on my apartment floor, staring at my laptop, feeling the kind of betrayal that makes your stomach go cold. I didn't have money to hire lawyers. I didn't have a family safety net I was willing to touch. So I did the only thing I could do. I rebuilt. Line by line. From scratch. And while I rebuilt, I wrote new rules inside my own head. No one gets the whole picture. No one gets the keys to the core. Not because I'm paranoid. Because I learned the hard way that the world doesn't protect you. You protect you. That's how Black Harbor Grid Shield started, not in a shiny office, but in a cold warehouse space in Red Hook, where the wind smelled like salt and diesel, and the floor always felt damp. My first team was small and strange in the best way, people who didn't fit neatly into corporate boxes but could outwork and outthink anyone in them. We built phantom wire, an intrusion monitoring system designed to sit silent inside industrial networks, watching learning, catching anomalies without slowing anything down. In OT, milliseconds matter. A hiccup can mean a valve fails, a breaker trips, a machine arm stutters. Our software had to be invisible and ruthless at the same time. Our first real contract came from a utility company that had just been hit with ransomware. They were desperate. The big firms gave them timelines that sounded like funerals. We promised speed and we delivered. When that first check cleared, I didn't celebrate. I stared at the balance long enough to feel my heart settle into a new rhythm. Not relief. Proof. Proof that I could build something real without anyone's permission. As we grew and moved operations toward Long Island City, I made a decision that shaped the next 8 years I hid. Not from the world, but from my family. I kept my legal name for what it was, but in the industry panels, interviews, press blurbs, I used a professional identity, a buffer between my work and the Halston ecosystem. I didn't do it for drama. I did it because I knew them. If they smelled success, they wouldn't congratulate me. They'd intervene. They'd attach strings. They'd turn my company into an extension of their image or their balance sheet. I didn't want their hands anywhere near the thing I'd built with blood and sleepless nights. For a while it worked. I built quietly. I lived modestly. I reinvested everything. I kept my circle tight and my core tighter. Then we won the kind of contract that stops being startup news and starts being a different category of attention. Critical infrastructure, real oversight, real stakes. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't post about it. I sat alone in my office and felt a single thought cut through the adrenaline. The bigger this gets, the more eyes will look. And if my family ever finds out, they won't need my address. They'll just follow the money. I thought I had built a fortress. I didn't realize I'd built a beacon. The night it happened, I was at my desk reviewing deployment timelines when my phone buzzed with a bank notification. Then another. Then an email from a process server. The air in my office went thin. I opened the attachment and saw the seal of the United States Bankruptcy Court, black and official on white paper. Petition for involuntary bankruptcy. My name. My company. And there, like a gunshot in numerical form, $2.4 million. A number chosen to make people gasp. Chosen to make me look reckless. Chosen to sound believable to strangers and devastating to clients. I stared at it until my eyes burned, and in that moment I understood exactly what my father had taught me in that library without realizing it. In the Halston family, truth has never been the point. Control has. And now, they were coming for mine. The petition hit my phone like a punch to the throat. It wasn't a rumor, not a threat, not a nasty email forwarded by some industry gossip account. It was official, stamped, formatted in that cold federal way that makes your pulse spike before your brain even catches up. In re Dashiell Mercer. In re Black Harbor Grid Shield. A forced bankruptcy filing initiated by my own brother. I read it once, standing in my office, then again sitting down because my knees decided they didn't want to hold me anymore. The story inside was almost elegant in how cruel it was. Colton claimed he'd personally rescued my company with a $2.4 million loan when I was supposedly desperate, that I burned through it in months, and that I was now dodging repayment. He painted me as reckless, incompetent, and dishonest, the kind of founder who plays CEO until the bills arrive. It wasn't just a legal document, it was a script written for creditors, clients, and anyone who'd ever searched my name. And right there, embedded between the accusations, was the real objective. He wasn't asking a court to help him collect. He was asking a court to take control, to appoint someone who could step into my company and touch the machinery. Operational oversight, receivership language. Authority to secure assets, preserve value, protect creditors. Words that sound harmless until you understand what they unlock. He wanted access to my operations. He wanted access to my intellectual property. He wanted the right under the cover of law to put his hands on the core of what I'd built. I kept reading and found the document he knew would land hardest: strategic investment agreement. It looked legitimate at first glance: sections, clauses, professional formatting, the kind of thing an expensive lawyer would draft and an expensive family would sign without blinking. It contained a clause that made my stomach drop. In the event of financial instability, the lender, Colton Halston, reserved the right to assume temporary operational control and appoint an interim board to safeguard the investment. Temporary, interim, safeguard. All the friendly words people use when they're trying to steal something without sounding like thieves. Then I hit the signature page. My name was there. My handwriting. The shape of the letters was mine in the way a mask can resemble your face. But it was wrong. Too even. Too smooth. The pressure didn't vary. The curves didn't show the tiny hesitation my hand always carries because of an old fracture that never healed perfectly. I'd broken my wrist in college, and ever since my signature had a faint, involuntary jag where the pen changes direction. This one was sterile, as if it had been drawn slowly by someone holding their breath. Not written, traced. Lifted from something I'd signed years ago and grafted into a lie. I should have felt relief. Forgery meant I could fight it. But relief didn't come because the deeper I went, the more I realized how carefully the lie had been constructed. The agreement referenced internal operational details, timelines, a deployment milestone, a location in our rollout sequence that wasn't public. Not even close. It wasn't the kind of detail you get from a press release or a trade article. It was the kind of detail you only know if you've seen the internal scheduling and the secured implementation calendar. Someone inside my company was talking to my brother. That thought wasn't emotional. It was mechanical, like a gear clicking into place. The document mixed one massive falsehood with several smaller truths. That's how you make fiction convincing. You lace it with something verifiable. You make the judge, the press, the clients think. If he knows this detail, he must be legitimate. If he knows this schedule, he must be involved. My phone buzzed again. Elena Marquez. I didn't answer with hello. I answered with, he filed it. I know, she said, and her voice didn't change. Get here. Now. I drove through Manhattan like I was chasing oxygen. Elena's office in Midtown was bright and quiet and brutal in its order. Glass, steel, clean lines, nothing sentimental. When I walked in, I didn't sit. I dropped the entire packet onto her desk hard enough that her pen jumped. This money never existed, I said. And that signature isn't mine. Elena didn't blink. She slid on her reading glasses and flipped through pages with the patience of someone dissecting a threat. We're going to treat this like what it is, she said. 2 fronts. She tapped the signature page. First, we prove fabrication. Forensic handwriting analysis. Comparison sets from your verified contracts, tax filings, state IDs. We go after the routing number they listed for the alleged transfer. We subpoena his accounts. We make the court look for money that never moved. Then she tapped the sections with operational control language. Second, we prove motive and method. This isn't a family dispute. This is an attempted takeover fueled by internal leakage. I pointed to the deployment detail I'd caught. He shouldn't know that. Elena's eyes sharpened. Exactly. And if he knows that, it means he's either hacked you or paid someone to talk. She turned another page and stopped at notarization. The silence that followed lasted 1 heartbeat too long. The notary seal was embossed, not printed. A physical press, real raised impression. And the name in the ring around it wasn't Colton's. It wasn't a random notary. Marjorie Halston. My mother. For a second, my brain tried to protect me with the old lie I'd carried for years. Colton is the problem. Reed enables. Marjorie just follows. Blair just manages optics. That story let me function. It let me compartmentalize. It let me imagine my mother was weak, not malicious. But that seal wasn't weakness. A seal is an action. A seal means she held paper in her hands and pressed her authority into it. Or she let someone take that authority and use it. Either way, my family wasn't watching Colton hurt me. They were participating. Elena's voice cut through the fog. "This changes the scope," she said calmly. "If her commission is expired, it's not just misconduct, it's fraud. If it's active, then she notarized a forged signature. Either way, she's tied to the document in a way no one can handwave." I swallowed hard. My throat felt raw and dry at the same time. I always told myself she wouldn't go that far. Elena gave me a look that wasn't unkind, just honest. People go farther when the stakes are fear and money. She slid the petition back toward me and pointed to a section that wasn't highlighted, wasn't dramatic, but was deadly. "Now we talk about why they chose bankruptcy." I knew. I didn't want to say it, but I knew. Elena didn't let me avoid it. "Your contract has stability clauses," she said. "A bankruptcy proceeding triggers review. It doesn't matter whether it's real or frivolous." They pause. They freeze. They don't care about your family drama. They care about risk. The air in the room felt thinner, because that was the true target. Not my pride, not my reputation, not even the $2.4 million lie. The target was the work, the deployments, the trust we'd earned with critical systems that can't afford chaos. "They don't need to prove you're broke," Elena said. "They only need to drag you into the process long enough for oversight to panic. Then they show up offering to help. They'll position Colton as the stable alternative who can protect the asset." I stared at the papers and felt something sharper than fear take over. Anger, yes, but not the loud kind. The focused kind. The kind that makes you stop thinking about what you want to yell and start thinking about what you need to build. "Those internal details," I said quietly. "That's the weak point. That's the entry point," Elena corrected. "And it's also our leverage. If they have someone inside, we can make that leak work for us." I looked down at the agreement again. The lie wasn't just that money moved. The lie was that he had any right to step into my company at all. If I could prove he was feeding off stolen information, his whole posture as a concerned creditor would collapse. And if he acted on a false internal detail, we could catch him in a legal misstep he couldn't explain away. Elena leaned forward. "Here's how we do this. Shield and sword." She listed it like a checklist because that's how she fought. Shield forensic signature analysis, routing number, validation, subpoena bank records, audit your company's books. Show solvency. Show the absence of any $2.4 million transfer. Destroy the premise. Then she paused and let the second part land. Sword-controlled misinformation. We plant a detail so specific it can only come from your inner circle. A fake asset relocation. A fake destination. If Colton's side references it in any motion affidavit emergency filing, we prove he has unauthorized access to internal communications. That's not family drama. That's espionage. I pictured my office, my team, people I'd promoted, trusted, paid well, defended. People who knew the late-night rhythms of our deployment schedules and the private language we used when we were under pressure. My stomach tightened, so I have to go back in there and pretend I'm cornered. "Yes," Elena said. "You can't blow up. You can't purge. You can't spook the leak. You act stressed, you act vulnerable, and you feed a memo to a small group. Then we wait and watch which way the water runs." I drove back to Long Island City with the petition in my passenger seat like it was radioactive. When I walked into the office, the lights were bright, the hum of servers steady, the usual rhythm of people working with purpose. On the surface, nothing had changed. But I felt the shift. Every laugh in the hallway, every glance, every phone lifted too quickly, my mind tagged it with a question mark. I walked past desks and forced my face into calm. I nodded at familiar people and felt like I was walking through my own house after discovering someone had copied the keys. Inside my office, I closed the door and stared at the wall for a long time. Then I opened a blank document. I was going to write a memo. It would be stamped confidential. It would include a destination that didn't exist for us. It would read like a desperate CEO trying to save his company from a court freeze. And then I was going to wait for my brother to make a move he couldn't possibly justify. By the time the week before the hearing began, the rumor had already metastasized. In this industry, people don't wait for facts. They wait for signals. A bankruptcy petition is a signal. Even when it's a lie, it still rattles cages. Vendors start calling. Prospects pause. Competitors start circling. And inside Black Harbor Gridshield, the tension sat in the air like static. Our office in Long Island City was usually loud in the best way: whiteboards filled with deployment notes, engineers arguing over edge cases, the quiet clatter of keyboards building something that mattered. That week, it was different. Conversations dropped when I walked by. People checked their phones too often. Anxiety moved through the floor like a vibration. I wanted to slam a fist on a table and demand answers. I wanted to pull security logs and interrogate everyone. But that wasn't strategy. That was emotion. And emotion was exactly what Colton expected from me. He wanted me to implode. He wanted me to turn my own company into a crime scene so he could point and say, "See, he can't handle it." So I did the opposite. I became the version of myself that scares people like Colton the most, the calm one. I scheduled a closed-door meeting with the only group that could carry the level of information my brother had referenced. 6 people, my chief engineer, my systems architect, the project manager on the infrastructure rollout, ops, compliance, finance, the people who held the keys to the timeline and the logistics. They filed into the glass conference room with careful faces. I didn't offer reassurance. I didn't offer panic. I offered direction. "We're under attack," I said, "legally and reputationally, and we're going to handle it by procedure." I laid down the rule before I laid down the bait. No Slack, no email, no texting. Verbal instructions only. If anyone takes notes, the notes come to me at the end of this meeting. If anyone asks for documentation, you refer them to counsel. If anyone outside this room asks what we're doing, the answer is business as usual. I watched their reactions the way you watch a poker table. Not because I enjoyed it, because I had to. Who immediately looked for a loophole. Who seemed relieved by structure. Who looked too interested. Then I slid the memo onto the table, paper only, internal stamp, emergency header. I didn't say the destination at first. I let them read. The memo explained in crisp corporate language that because of the pending bankruptcy process, there was a risk a court-appointed trustee could attempt to freeze physical and digital assets in New York City. It framed the next step as a temporary protection measure to preserve continuity of operations, not concealment. It named specific categories: backup drives, server racks tied to the current infrastructure project, and offline copies of critical IP. Then it stated the action: relocation to a secure vault. Charleston, South Carolina. A date, a time window, a staging point, container codes, inventory lists. A route that sounded plausible. It was written with enough grit and specificity to feel real, because lies only work when they taste like truth. Charleston wasn't in our system. We had no facility there. We had no vendor there. We had no reason to touch South Carolina. That was the point. I watched their eyes as they read. The chief engineer frowned, annoyed at extra work. The architect's shoulders tightened, concerned, but focused. Compliance blinked slowly, calculating risk. Finance scanned the inventory list like he was already seeing cost overruns. And then Trent Caldwell, our project manager, asked exactly the question I needed him to ask. "Is this legal?" he said, voice-controlled. If we're already in proceedings, I answered the way a cornered CEO would answer, not the way the truth would. "It's a preservation measure," I said. "We're not hiding anything. We're ensuring continuity. I'm taking responsibility." I didn't over-explain. Over-explaining is a tell. I let the weight hang and watched what they did with it. Trent's gaze went back to the page. He didn't write anything down, but he stared at the Charleston address a beat too long, like he was photographing it with his eyes. His breathing changed, subtle, but it changed. The kind of change you only notice when you're watching for it. I ended the meeting quickly. "This leaves the building tonight," I said, "and it stays in this room." They filed out with the careful speed of people carrying a secret they didn't want to drop. I stayed behind, standing in the shadow of the glass wall so I could see the hallway without being seen. Trent walked straight past his desk, straight past the break room, straight toward the elevators, moving fast but trying to look normal. He hit the lobby and kept going. Through the glass, I watched him cross the parking lot. He pulled his phone out before he reached his car. Not to text, to call. He paced head down, hand tight around the device, body angled away like he knew he was being watched even if he didn't see me. My stomach didn't flip. It settled. A terrible calm. I left the office and went straight to Elena's war room in Midtown. Her conference table was already buried under binders and forensic reports. The shield was coming together exactly as she'd promised: handwriting analysis with overlays against verified samples, a routing number check that failed validation, and subpoenas moving through channels that don't care about family names. Elena laid it out with clinical precision. If he claims he wired money, we make him show the wire. If he can't, his entire petition looks like bad faith. If we prove your solvency, we undermine the foundation. And if Charleston shows up on his side anywhere, motion affidavit emergency filing, we prove he has access to internal info through improper means. I nodded, then did the thing I hadn't expected to do in the middle of a legal war. I made a phone call to protect the work. Ms. Hart answered on the second ring. Oversight? Contracting. The person whose job it was to keep risk away from critical systems. This is Dashiell Mercer, I said, keeping my tone steady. I'm notifying you that a malicious litigation action has been filed against my company. We are contesting it. We remain fully operational. I wanted you to hear that directly from me, and I want any correspondence claiming trusteeship or asset seizure to be verified through my counsel before any action is taken. There was a pause, the kind that tells you someone is measuring you. Thank you, she said. We will flag it. Keep your house in order. I will, I said, and meant it. When I hung up, the weight in my chest shifted. This wasn't only about my name anymore. It was about keeping a project moving that couldn't afford disruption. About keeping people safe who would never know my family tried to pull the plug on their systems just to win a private war. Elena's phone buzzed while I was still standing there. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at me. They're preparing something, she said. An emergency motion. My pulse didn't spike. It sharpened. Good, I said quietly. Because if Colton's team came into court claiming I was hiding assets and they used Charleston as their justification, they wouldn't just be making an accusation. They'd be leaving fingerprints. They'd be admitting they knew something they had no right to know. And once they did that, the story wouldn't be about my supposed insolvency anymore. It would be about how far they were willing to go to seize what wasn't theirs. I left Midtown and drove back toward Queens under a sky the color of steel. In my head, I ran the next days like a checklist. Stay calm. Stay procedural. Keep the bait believable. Let the leak travel. Let the other side commit the error. Because if they were going to turn my life into a spectacle, then I was going to make sure the final scene belonged to facts, not performance. Elena called before dawn, the kind of call that tells you not to bother pretending you were asleep. Her voice was clipped and steady, but I could hear the edge under it. Open the court's docket email, she said. Now. I stood in my kitchen in Brooklyn, bare feet on cold tile, laptop open on the counter like a confession. The subject line made my jaw lock: emergency motion for temporary restraining order. I clicked. I read the first page, then the second, then the paragraph that made my stomach go perfectly still. Charleston, South Carolina. They weren't even subtle. Colton's counsel claimed I was preparing to divert company assets to a secure facility in Charleston to hide them from creditors in the court. They asked for immediate relief, freeze orders, prohibitions, a court command that would let them paint me as a man running with a bag of cash in the night. Charleston existed nowhere in my real operations. It lived only in the paper memo I'd handed to 6 people in a glass conference room. That was it. No vendors, no logistics tickets, no purchase orders, no warehouse, no registered facility. If it was showing up in a sworn filing, it meant the bait had traveled exactly where Elena and I needed it to travel. But what hit harder than the satisfaction of being right was what Charleston represented. It wasn't just proof of a leak. It was proof of intent. They weren't chasing repayment. They were trying to yank on the emergency brake of my company so hard it would snap. Elena didn't let me float in the moment. "This is good," she said, "and it's dangerous." "Because of the project," I said. "Because of the clients," she corrected. "They won't stop at court. A filing like this gets leveraged. They'll reach out to anyone who pays you and anyone who trusts you. They'll weaponize fear. They'll try to freeze payments, stall implementation, and make you look unstable." I stared at the words, "temporary restraining order," and thought about the people who didn't care about my family name, only the risk it could bring into their systems. Utilities. Municipal infrastructure. Healthcare. Institutions that live and die by continuity. The moment they hear bankruptcy, they picture chaos. The moment they hear trustee, they picture strangers with authority. The moment they hear relocation, they picture a company trying to run. My phone buzzed with another message from Elena. Not a question, a confirmation. I checked the notary she texted. Marjorie's commission expired years ago. I read it twice. Then again slowly, like my eyes could change the meaning. Expired. Years ago. That seal on the forged agreement wasn't just unethical. It wasn't even just fraud in the abstract. It was a specific provable piece of wrongdoing. Either my mother had pressed an expired seal into a document, or someone had used her seal while she looked the other way, or she'd lied about the status of it for years. None of those versions allowed me to keep telling myself she was merely caught in Colton's storm. My internal war shifted in that moment. It wasn't me versus my brother anymore. It was me versus the entire Halston machine, polished and practiced and willing to burn down my life to keep control of the narrative. Elena called again. "There's more," she said. I opened the TRO attachment again, this time reading for technical tells instead of emotion. Elena guided me like a surgeon. Page 7. That line about the staggered deployment phase, that reference to the integration window. I found it, and my throat tightened. They referenced a component of our rollout that wasn't public and wasn't general. It was the kind of detail that lived in our project timeline and the internal engineering calendar. Something a consultant couldn't guess. Something a casual observer couldn't infer. "This isn't just someone repeating the memo," Elena said. "They have operational access." It meant the leak wasn't a one-time slip. It meant someone could see what we were doing when we were doing it and how we were doing it. Someone close enough to cause harm without ever setting foot in a server room. I wanted to react. To lock accounts. To pull badges. To fire people in a wave and deal with the fallout later. But Elena had already warned me what that would do. If I made sudden moves, the leak would disappear into a new channel, a burner phone, a coffee meeting, a cousin's lawyer, something I couldn't trace. So I didn't do anything loud. I did things quiet. That afternoon I sat with our internal IT lead and gave instructions like I was ordering a renovation, not a counterintelligence operation. We tightened permissions in layers, not slamming doors, just narrowing hallways. We created individualized watermarks for sensitive documents so each person's view carried a subtle identifier. Nothing obvious, nothing that screamed trap. Just enough that if content moved, we'd know whose version it came from. We turned on deeper logging on the project server, who opened what from which device, from which network, at what time, how long it stayed open. We added alerts for downloads of timeline documents and architecture summaries that had no legitimate reason to be accessed at midnight. By evening, the first report landed in my inbox. It was dry. It was technical. It was the kind of thing you can stare at for a long time without breathing, because it doesn't look like betrayal until you understand what it means. A project management account accessed the deployment timeline at an hour that didn't match any scheduled work. It wasn't a late-night emergency. It wasn't an outage. It was the wrong kind of access, quiet, deliberate, and strangely timed. I cross-referenced schedules. The account's activity aligned with Trent's domain of control. It didn't prove Trent did it, but it proved the information was moving through his neighborhood. I didn't confront him. I didn't change his access. I didn't even let my expression change when I passed him in the hallway the next morning. If he was the conduit he needed to feel safe enough to keep talking. Meanwhile, Elena prepared for the hearing like it was both a legal event and a media event, because in Manhattan, Those two things share the same oxygen. We predicted cameras. We predicted planted quotes. We predicted curated anguish. Your job, she told me, is to be a wall. No reactions. No hallway arguments. No sound bites. You don't win this in the lobby. You win it in the transcript. Because the transcript is the one thing they couldn't edit. That night when I thought I'd finally get a few hours of silence, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. A hospital CIO from Tri-State Metro Care. I'd met him twice, both times in rooms where everything smelled like disinfectant and urgency. Dash, he said, voice tight. We received an email about a trustee and an asset verification process. It mentions Charleston. It references your company and claims a court order. My stomach went cold again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from recognition. Elena had called it. They were moving beyond court filings. They were trying to touch the clients. Don't do anything, I said. Forward it to me. Include the full headers. We haven't responded, he said. But it looks official. The board is already asking questions. I'll handle it, I said. And the words felt heavier than any vow I'd ever made. You did the right thing by calling. When I hung up, I stood in my apartment with the lights off, looking out at Brooklyn like the city might offer an answer. I didn't know how far they'd go, but I knew the direction. They weren't aiming to embarrass me anymore. They were aiming to create a crisis so loud that everyone would accept them as the solution. I didn't sleep. I watched the clock. I listened to the city. I waited for the next dirty step because I could feel it coming with the certainty of weather. The morning of the hearing, Manhattan looked like it always does when it's trying to pretend winter doesn't matter. Gray sky, sharp wind, people moving fast like speed could change the temperature. Outside the federal courthouse, cameras were already clustered at the steps, lenses pointed like weapons reporters rehearsing the same questions with the same cadence. I stepped out of the car and the flashbulbs hit me like a wall of light. For a fraction of a second, I was back in my 20s, walking into a room full of Halston friends who'd already decided I was the problem. Then I felt Elena at my side, moving with the calm of someone who'd done this 100 times and never once let panic steer. Eyes forward, she murmured. No mouth. Microphones pushed toward me. Someone yelled my name like it was a verdict. Another voice shouted, 2.4 million, as if saying the number out loud made it real. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn. I walked through them like the air around me was thick but harmless. Inside the marble lobby gleamed too clean for what people did in it. Reed Halston was there, tall posture, perfect suit, shaking hands like this was a gala and not a courtroom. Marjorie sat with that same composed grief she'd practiced for decades, black clothes and a delicate scarf, eyes damp at the corners at exactly the right moments. Blair stood where the cameras could see her if they panned, dressed like elegance itself, face carefully neutral. Colton waited near the corridor to the courtroom, and when he saw me, he did what he always did. He smiled like he owned the ending. He stepped into my path at just the right distance, so the surrounding people could hear without it sounding like a scene. I tried to save you, he said softly, dripping with moral superiority. You didn't have to do this to yourself. It was designed to hook my emotion and drag it out in public. The words weren't for me. They were for the clip, the narrative, the version of the story where he's the brother who offered help, and I'm the man too proud to accept it. My chest tightened. My mouth almost moved. Elena's hand landed on my forearm like a break. Not rough, not dramatic. Just enough to redirect my body past him. Not here, she said so quietly it could have been a breath. We kept walking. Colton's smile held for a second longer, then flattened as we didn't give him anything to harvest. Halfway down the corridor, my phone buzzed. It was the Tri-State CIO again, and the timing alone told me this wasn't an update. This was escalation. Dash, he said, without preamble, we got a second message. It's not just about assets. It's asking for credentials. I stopped walking just for a heartbeat, then kept moving while Elena watched my face. What credentials? I asked. Root access, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. They're claiming they're a court-appointed trustee. They're saying they need to verify systems before transfer to Charleston. They're requesting the password for oxygen and life support control interfaces. For a moment, the hallway noise disappeared. All I could hear was the blood moving in my ears. Because that wasn't just harassment. That was someone reaching for the throat of a hospital. "Do not give them anything," I said, my voice dropping into the tone I use during incidents at 3 a.m. Lockdown. Whitelist only known IPs. Isolate the admin interface. Forward the email with full headers. I want source path and any attachments. "We already froze the request," he said. "But it looks like a court order. People are scared." "They're counting on that," I said. "Fear is the tool. Process is the shield. Send me everything." I hung up and looked at Elena. I didn't have to explain. My face told her enough. She didn't ask if I was okay. She asked for what mattered. "Do you have it?" "Not yet," I said. "But it mentions Charleston." Elena's eyes hardened. "Then it's connected. And if it's connected, it's not just bad faith litigation. It's impersonation and an attempted intrusion." We detoured into the building's business center, the kind of bland office room meant for people printing exhibits and praying over binders. Elena moved fast, all focus, no wasted motion. I forwarded the CIO's email to her as soon as it hit my inbox. She didn't just print the body. She printed the headers, the routing path, the technical fingerprints that people like Colton never think about because they assume the world runs on appearances. As the printer spit out pages, I scanned the timestamps. The email had been sent minutes before we walked into the courthouse. Not hours, not last night. Minutes. Which meant whoever sent it was either reckless beyond reason or close enough to do it while sitting inside this building hidden by the noise of the hearing. Elena stacked the pages like ammunition. "This changes the posture," she said. "The judge won't treat this as siblings fighting over money once we show a fake court order aimed at a hospital system." I swallowed the urge to run back into the lobby and drag Colton by the collar in front of every camera. That's what he wanted. That's what he'd trained me toward my whole life. Instead, I did what my company had taught me to do, treat it like an incident. Contain, preserve evidence, escalate through proper channels. We walked into the courtroom and the air felt different in there, denser, like everyone was holding the same breath. Lawyers at tables, clerks setting up, observers in the back rows like they were watching theater. I scanned the gallery not out of paranoia, but because paranoia is useless and observation is not. And there he was. Trent Caldwell, sitting near the rear cap, pulled low company jacket, zipped up, positioned close to the aisle like a man who expected to leave quickly. He didn't look at me like an employee worried about his CEO. He looked at me like someone watching a live feed, waiting to report. My hand tightened around the edge of the table as Elena slid into her seat beside me. Across the aisle, Gideon Price, Colton's attorney, arranged his documents with smug precision. Colton sat behind him, posture relaxed, eyes dipping toward his phone beneath the table like a habit he couldn't break. Reed and Marjorie wore their public faces. Reed's jaw set in righteous disappointment. Marjorie's fingers curled around her tissue like a prop she'd rehearsed with. Blair held herself still, carefully camera-ready, even when no cameras were allowed inside, because she understood something most people don't. Courtrooms have their own kind of audience. Elena placed the printed email at the front of our stack where she could reach it in one motion. I could feel my heartbeat, but it didn't control me. I was past embarrassment now, past family pain, past the old desire to be understood. If they were willing to pose as a trustee to pry at life support systems, then they weren't just trying to ruin my career. They were endangering people who had nothing to do with the Halstons, nothing to do with my last name, nothing to do with my childhood. The clerk called the room to order. Chairs shifted, papers whispered. The judge entered, and the temperature seemed to drop 1 more degree. I stared straight ahead, hand still, face unreadable, because that was the only way to keep this from becoming the circus my family had planned. And as the hearing began, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. All it would take was one properly framed question about a federal infrastructure contract and the obligations tied to it, and the story they'd built, bankruptcy, concern, moral outrage, would collapse under the weight of what they had actually done. Not in the lobby, not on camera, in the record, where lies go to die. The The courtroom felt like a set built to kill me in public. The gallery was packed reporters, family friends, people who'd already decided what kind of man I was. I sat where they wanted me, the defendant's table spine, straight palms on cold wood face still. They needed me to shake. I didn't give them that. Gideon Price stood and delivered his opening like a press release with a law degree. He called me reckless. He called Black Harbor Grid Shield a shell. He said I'd torched $2.4 million and was about to run again, and he said Charleston like it was a destination he'd personally watched me book. He asked the court to appoint a trustee immediately to step in to seize control to protect creditors. It sounded responsible until you listened to what it actually meant. Judge Latham Klein didn't look impressed. He flipped through the filing, stopped at the company description, and lifted his eyes past Gideon, past Elena, straight to me. His voice wasn't loud, but it had that precision that makes a room go quiet. Mr. Mercer, he said, is Black Harbor Grid Shield, a prime or key contractor on a federal critical infrastructure protection project. I answered the only way a man tells the truth when it matters. Yes, Your Honor. He didn't let me hide behind vagueness. Does that work involve federal oversight and active operating systems for power, water, or hospitals? Yes, I said again, careful with my scope, clear on what I could confirm. The air changed. My father, Reed Halston, went still in the front row too, still like a man hearing the floor open under him. Colton's expression collapsed in real time, his smugness draining out like someone pulled a plug. Gideon's face lost color because he understood what the judge had just done. He'd moved this out of family theater and into a category where lies don't stay civil. Elena rose and asked permission to proceed by evidence. No speeches, no hurt feelings, just structure. She established solvency, first independent audit statements, reserves no debt that matched the claim. Then she went for the so-called loan. The routing number was invalid. The check sum didn't match any legitimate bank. Subpoenaed records showed no transfer. The investment agreement fell apart under the camera of forensic comparison, my real signatures over years versus the one they filed, too uniform, too controlled, the telltale hesitation marks of tracing. Gideon tried to redirect, but Elena kept tightening the frame, bad faith filing designed to trigger review and freeze under a federal contract. Then she put my mother's name in the center of the room without raising her voice. The notary seal, Marjorie Halston, and the state confirmation her commission had been expired for years. Either she pressed that seal into a forged document, or her seal had been used as part of the fraud. My mother's morning look cracked for a second. My father shifted like he was trying to sit in a different skin, but he couldn't. The more he tried to hold the saint posture, the more obvious his fear became. Elena held up their own emergency motion and read the word that mattered. Charleston. She didn't have to dramatize it. I stood when the judge addressed me and said it cleanly. Charleston was not real. We have no facility there. I created that destination as controlled internal information to test for a leak. It was shared only with my senior management. The judge's gaze sharpened. It wasn't just a false allegation now. It was proof they'd received internal operational data they had no lawful way to obtain. Then Elena placed the printed email on the record, the one sent to Tri-State MetroCare, the one that used Charleston to sound credible. The sender claimed to be a court-appointed trustee. The message demanded root access to life support systems, attached a fake court order, and tried to force a hospital into compliance through fear. The courtroom stopped being a place where rich families argue about money. It became a room where a judge had to consider impersonation wire fraud and attempted interference with critical services. I didn't accuse anyone with emotion. I only pointed when the judge asked about internal access. That man, I said, indicating the back row. Trent Caldwell. He's on my project side. The judge instructed the bailiff to control the doors. No one moved. For the first time all morning, my family looked like they understood the roles had flipped. I wasn't being tried by their story anymore. They were being examined by the court. Judge Klein leaned back then forward and stripped the case down to the one demand no performance can survive. Show me the money, he said. If you filed based on a specific debt, you produce proof of the transfer. Gideon started talking about complex structures and private arrangements, but the judge cut him off. Evidence, he said, not narrative. Gideon's hands trembled as he shuffled paper that couldn't save him. Elena introduced the detail that connected the lie to something older and uglier. The transaction coding and footer metadata on the forged agreement matched the formatting used by Halston Ridge Advisory, my father's firm. She paired it with public indicators, complaints, questions, and investigation trail around missing allocations that mirrored the same number, $2.4 million. I didn't need anyone to explain the shape of it. My brother's loan wasn't just a weapon against me. It was a paper tunnel for my father's books, a way to bury a hole under the label of a failed family rescue. Judge Klein called my father to the stand area. He asked simple questions that left no place to hide. Did you know about this agreement? Did you authorize any transfers? Do you recognize this coding? Reed tried to push it onto Colton to frame it as a son acting alone, but the judge pointed out what was obvious in the record. The notary seal belonged to Reed's wife, the coding matched Reed's system, and the only beneficiary of a lost loan story was Reed's balance sheet and reputation. My father's control cracked. He tried to protect his image and ended up exposing motive. He spoke about needing time, needing the quarter to close clean, needing the project to pause so things could settle. Elena didn't pounce. She simply let the words sit in the transcript where they could never be unsaid, and she made the court hear what they meant, intent to interfere with an active, federal-linked infrastructure deployment. Then the judge turned to Trent. He asked about contact with Colton. Trent tried to minimize it until the judge pressed on specifics, Charleston timeline's internal details. Trent admitted what mattered. Colton offered him a title, and money at the family firm asked for schedules and operational details, and Trent fed him what he could, including the Charleston memo. He said he knew it felt wrong, but did it anyway. In a few minutes, the triangle became clear. Colton requested, Trent supplied, Reed stood to benefit. Judge Klein ruled with a finality that felt like air rushing back into my lungs. The involuntary petition was dismissed immediately as a bad faith filing grounded in false documents. Colton was barred from refiling the same claim. Exhibits were preserved, and the transcript and evidence were referred for federal investigation, forgery fraud on the court, impersonation, wire fraud, bribery, corporate espionage, and attempted interference with critical operations. The judge ordered Trent held for further coordination and treated the hospital email as especially serious. Colton couldn't stop himself when he realized the room no longer belonged to him. He blurted that it was never about repayment, that he just wanted to bring me down, to put me back where he thought I belonged. The judge had it entered into the record. No more pretending this was concern. Outside the courtroom in the hallway, my parents reached for me like they could still claim the role of family. They begged for a private talk. They begged me not to let the investigation touch the firm. My father's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. My mother looked at me like grief could erase ink. I kept my voice even, because that was the only way to make it real. Today, I'm not here as your son, I said. I'm here as the CEO of Black Harbor Gridshield. Families argue at dinner. They don't try to bankrupt their own child in federal court. I didn't negotiate. I didn't soften it. I walked away. That afternoon, I contacted oversight and confirmed what the ruling meant. The petition was dead, the court had recognized fraud, and our work continued. Back at the office, I activated the security plan we'd built for exactly this kind of breach, revoked Trent's access, audited every pathway, rebuilt trust with clients through facts and timelines. I had walked into court expecting to be humiliated on camera. I walked out with my company intact, the record clean, and the one thing I'd hidden for 8 years no longer buried, not to impress anyone, but to protect something my family never understood: the work that keeps other people's lights on. You know, walking out of that courthouse, I expected relief, to feel like a clean break, a snap, a shock of cold air, maybe even a taste of victory. But the truth. It felt more like the moment when a deep wound finally closes, not with celebration, but with the strange quiet of survival. I remember the clatter of heels and camera shutters echoing behind me, the last flashes dying against the glass, and the world outside brighter than I remembered. I stood on those courthouse steps, one hand gripping the railing, just to remind myself I was still real, still here, still holding the weight and the proof that none of them could take away who I'd become. For 8 years, I lived as a shadow in my own family's story. I watched my name get twisted into a cautionary tale, my work erased by gossip and arrogance, my intentions recast by people who cared more about control than about truth. I kept my head down and built something lasting because deep down I thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I just stayed quiet and good and useful, maybe I'd finally earn a seat at their table. But all that did was teach me how little that table actually mattered. There's this myth about family, about blood, about loyalty, about unconditional love. But sometimes the people who should be your foundation turn into your fiercest critics. Sometimes they trade your trust for their own security. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can offer yourself is the decision to walk away. That's what I learned standing in the fluorescent haze of a federal courtroom, staring across polished wood at the faces I used to trust and realizing maybe for the first time that I was the only one fighting for the right thing. It's not easy to break free from that kind of story. The world loves neat endings, stories about prodigal sons returning, about forgiveness earned and granted, about families coming together in the end. But my story isn't neat. My story is jagged and uncomfortable and true. My story is about what happens when you refuse to be the scapegoat, when you choose to put your integrity above your last name, when you realize that protecting what matters most sometimes means letting go of what you always thought mattered. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Every lie cut deep. Every public accusation felt like a slap I had to absorb in silence. But when Judge Klein looked at me, not at my father, not at Colton, not at the narrative that had been built up in private emails and closed-door meetings, and asked for the truth, I realized that my story wasn't a tragedy. It was a reckoning. It was a reminder that in the end, only the truth can withstand the light. And here's what I want to say to you, whoever you are, if you're still reading, if you're still listening, don't let anyone, not even the people you love, define your worth for you. Don't let their fears or insecurities become your prison. If you're fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, I promise you, you're not alone. Maybe your battle isn't in a courtroom. Maybe it's at work, at home, in a classroom, or just in your own mind. But I hope you know that standing up for yourself, even when your voice shakes, even when you have to stand alone, that's the bravest thing you'll ever do. I learned to trust the team that stood by me when it mattered, the friends who stayed up with me at 3 a.m, the mentors who taught me not just how to build a company, but how to survive a storm. The colleagues who chose honesty over convenience. I learned that family isn't about who shares your DNA, it's about who shows up when the lights go out, who believes in you when you can't believe in yourself. So maybe this story isn't just about legal battles and family betrayal. Maybe it's about becoming the kind of person who can walk away from the table and set your own. Maybe it's about refusing to let the people who doubted you write your ending. Maybe it's about turning pain into purpose, about fighting for something bigger than yourself, whether that's a company, a cause, or just a quiet kind of peace. If you took anything from my story, let it be this: you get to decide what you carry forward. You get to decide whose voice matters, whose approval you seek, whose love you let define you. Let go of the rest. Forgive if you cannot for them, but for yourself. Then keep building. Keep believing. Keep telling the truth even when it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw even a piece of yourself in these words, I hope you'll stick around. Drop a comment below, let me know where you're watching from, or just say, hi. Sometimes the smallest connection, a word, a wave, a simple, I hear you, can make the weight of a story a little lighter. If you found value here, if you want to be part of a community that values honesty and resilience, consider subscribing. Your presence matters more than you know. Thank you for listening. Thank you for standing in this moment with me. No matter how alone you might feel, trust me, you're not the only one fighting to be heard. And sometimes, just sometimes, telling your story is the first step toward becoming the person you were always meant to be. So here's to new beginnings. Here's to truth, no matter how much it costs. Here's to the courage to walk away from what breaks you, and the hope that you'll find something stronger on the other side. My name is Dash Mercer, and I'm done hiding. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories that dig beneath the surface, that don't shy away from the hard stuff, that honor both the pain and the possibility, subscribe, share, and be part of this journey. Because we're all carrying something, and sometimes sharing it is the only way we move forward.